Welcome in everyone to the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We will be covering, first of all, the College Football Playoff has approved a new 5+7 format for the 2024 and 2025 season. We will get into the effects of that. And then we have a ton of changes happening in college football this year. I'll try to break down as many as I possibly can, and this might be a recurring segment because there are just so many happening in 2024. And then we'll get into some guys that have a lot of pressure on them going into 2024, some obvious candidates, and then some guys you maybe hadn't thought of, but definitely have a big target on their back, a big stuff on their shoulders, really, going into the season. And then we'll finish it up with Spotlight Wednesday, a new segment here where we are going to break down a new team every week. This week it is going to be the Miami Hurricanes. So if you're a Miami Hurricanes fan, stick around till the end to see that for sure. But before we start, I do want to bring to your attention that if you are wanting to ask a question, we do get a lot of those throughout the show. So the best way for you and us to get that question is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. It's a huge help not only to us, but to you all if you want to ask a question and want to see it on the screen and I can answer it as to the best of my ability. So definitely use that if you would like to ask a question. But let's jump right in because it has been a crazy couple of weeks in college football. And that is not changing anytime soon, of course. But the thing that happened this week that has kind of set the world on fire has been the college football playoff deciding to move to a 5+7 format, which would mean 5 auto bids for the conference champions of the top 5 conferences, and then 7 at-large bids. Now, they had previously thought they were going to do a 6+6 format, which would be obviously 6 auto bids and 6 at-large bids, but they obviously, with the Pac-12 kind of dissolving over the last couple of years, only Oregon State and Washington State being left out over there, they've changed that approach, obviously. They still want to include a group of 5 conference champions, so they did include that 5th auto bid, which, you obviously love to see a lower conference be able to get in on the action, and especially in this expanded playoff, you don't want it to just be all the teams right up at the top fighting it out. You do want some Cinderella stories if you can, so you gotta like that if you are a fan of a MAC team or a Sun Belt or Conference USA. You have a shot in this, and obviously there's a ton to overcome once you get into the playoff, but at least you'll be able to get on the dance floor and see what happens. This is very interesting for me for a number of reasons. Obviously, the 2024 season will be totally different. We will be talking about totally different matchups, meaning a lot of things when in past years they maybe have been kind of diminished by the 4-team playoff and not being able to get in. We will have teams with 2 losses, possibly even a team with 3 losses finding their way into the playoff. So the conversations will be totally different throughout 2024. But I think something to keep in mind when looking at this is they changed course pretty quickly on this one. There was plans for a very long time for it to be 6+6 in 2024 and 2025, and then for them to come back to the table and figure out where they sit and what the best path forward is from there. They didn't even get to the 6+6 before they changed the formatting of the playoff, and I think that at the very least shows us that these people are going to be malleable throughout this process. College football is going through a state of change, which we will talk about in the next segment, but they're obviously willing to budge, right? They're willing to adapt to the different circumstances around them, especially when conference realignment is involved and you see a lot of teams leaving a conference, making it less viable. I mean, the Pac-12 is currently kind of fighting to be seen as a viable conference, even though there's only really 2 of them out there, so I think that might be an uphill battle. But all this to say, I think what happens in 2024 when throughout this offseason, let's say Florida State finds their way out of the ACC for free in this scenario, but let's say even if they find it out for some type of settlement between the crazy $400 million or $700 million, whatever the number you've heard, and the $0 that Florida State would much prefer to pay. The question is now, what happens if Florida State's able to get out, and then Clemson follows suit? North Carolina's right there, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech. What happens basically if the ACC folds within the next even 6 months? We've talked about how quickly this can happen, and we talked about the battle between the ACC, and Florida State yesterday, and it's going to be a real battle. And Florida State, I tend to believe, is going to come out on top. So the question is then, do you take another auto bid away? Do you move to 4+8? Do you change the format entirely? Basically, things are going to keep changing, right? Things are going to keep developing in this conference realignment, and we've seen that even recently with Florida State against the ACC. So the question is, how long do we have the 5+7 until we get to the 4+8, or until we get to a 16-team playoff and have it totally different, until we get to maybe no such thing as auto bids, which I tend to like. I'll be totally honest. I'll get into that more a little bit later, but I think this at the very least shows that the college football playoff is willing to come to the table really at any point. So with the changing world in college football right now, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if Florida State were to come out on top in the court battle between the ACC and were able to leave, and the ACC started to kind of crumble before our eyes. I wouldn't be surprised if we went into 2025 with a 4+8, and then they were right back at the table after 2025, because the SEC and the Big Ten have gobbled up so many teams and have become so powerful in this space that they come to the table and say, why should we be giving any auto bids to these smaller conferences? Why should we be giving any credence to the people that aren't as talented as us, aren't at playing the same level of game as us? And obviously, that's not necessarily ideal for college football in my mind. I mean, you'd love to see the best teams go at it, and I think if you're going to be at this point, I don't necessarily love auto bids in general, but that doesn't necessarily mean I don't love a group of 5 team getting into the mix, right? College football, one of the great things about it is you have so many different products across so many different levels, and the group of 5 is a massive part of the FBS and a massive part of college football overall. So seeing a team like Tulane, seeing a team like Buffalo, if they can find their way in, seeing a team like USF, which we will absolutely be talking about in the coming days here. There's tons of teams that maybe aren't the top 12 teams in the country. In fact, I can probably confirm that none of the teams I just listed will be a top 12 team in the country in 2024. But what I can say is those teams could run the table. They could go 11-1 and win their conference title and be right in the mix in terms of what they've accomplished by what's in front of them, right? You can't play anyone else than the people that are scheduled for you, right? So a team that goes 11-1 or goes 12-1 or goes 13-0 in a smaller conference and finds their way in even beyond this auto bid process, I think it's something to keep an eye out on, because the question is now, at least for 2024 and possibly 2025, is the auto bid the only way that these smaller conferences get in? I tend to believe that is the case. I think we will see 5 auto bids, 1 from the group of 5, and then we will have 7 at-large teams that, if I'm being totally honest, I think about 6 of them could come from the SEC and the Big Ten, and then have 1 from the Big 12 or the ACC. Now, all of that is still very much up in the air, especially for 2024, because the ACC is still there, still has tons of really good teams. The Big 12 has a lot of really intriguing teams in Utah and Kansas State and Texas Tech and all these different teams that could possibly make a run. I really like the Kansas State team in particular, but I guess the question is, if this is the first step, right? If this is the first compromise they're willing to make in this whole grand scheme of things, where does it stop? And I guess who are the people that can make that happen? And I tend to believe not only right now, but going forward, especially into 2025 and 6 and 7 and so on, the SEC and the Big Ten are only going to become bigger powerhouses, right? They're only going to wield more power in terms of viewership and in terms of dollars, which really, there are a lot of people that make decisions in the sport where if you have, the most money rolling in, it's hard for them to go against you in a lot of ways. So I think the SEC and the Big Ten could very easily wield a lot of that power to change the playoff kind of at their leisure. And obviously, there's going to be some hurdles to get over there. There's not this, ability for them to just walk in the room, snap their fingers, and everything to change into their favor. But what I will say is they're going to be the power holders in college football, them and, the media companies. And a lot of the media companies have deals with these conferences. So I guess the question is, when you come to 2025 and a team from the group of five hasn't won a playoff game, and the teams from the ACC and the Big 12 have won maybe one, maybe Kansas State or Florida State makes a run in their last year in the ACC, and you're looking in 2026 and you're thinking the only teams that really make runs in this playoff format are SEC and Big 10 teams, which is tend to I tend to believe that's what's going to happen. Now, obviously, there's tons of variables to go there. I think there will be some teams that come out of nowhere. That's what happened with TCU, not, even 2 years ago. So I guess the question is, how long till the SEC and Big Ten wield their power and can kind of just decide what the future of this thing is? And I think if they were to do that, the auto bids would be essentially wiped out pretty quickly. Now they could drop it to 2 or whatever number they see fit, but I do think we will be seeing kind of a slow drop in that number, not only because we will see the SEC and Big Ten be so dominant in this new era, but also we're going to see less and less conferences be viable conferences. A year ago, we didn't necessarily think the Pac-12 was going to fold before our eyes, and then it happened very quickly. So whether it's the ACC with Florida State fighting right now, or it's the Big 12 with their new structure, maybe it doesn't work out. I don't know. But the question always has been in this sport, how do you even out the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, right? How do you fix this massive gap that is forming? And I'm not sure there's a great way to do it, if I'm being totally honest. I think unless in this next year or this next couple of years where we have this format, a group of 5 team can break through and can make some noise in the playoff and make it be known that this isn't, a fluke. This is something that can be done by these teams throughout the year. I think it's going to be really hard to come to the table and argue against the SEC and the Big Ten and all of the things that they bring into the sport, especially with the new people coming in. I mean, Texas and Oklahoma bring a massive new market to the SEC. The Big Ten is adding a ton of people from the West Coast that probably didn't watch the Big Ten much on their Saturdays. So it's a lot of stuff is changing, and I don't think this college football playoff format will be the last one that we see. Maybe not even the last one we see before the 2025 season. But for 2024, we are looking at a 5+7 format. I like the format. I think it'll be very interesting to see how it all comes together. And I think one thing to keep in mind just at the end here is the 5 auto bids are not necessarily the top 5 seeds in this thing. So an auto bid could go to the number 12 team, which hypothetically would probably be the group of 5 team in this scenario. But it'll be interesting to see how this works. I'm personally kind of hoping for some smaller teams to make some runs, keep some of the regionality, some of the levels of conferences, and keeping the viability of the group of 5 alive. But there's ton to be seen, and everything's changing and moving all at once, and it feels like a lot of people are being kind of turned off by that idea. And I think I might just have to do a Good Vibes Monday just to remind everyone why this sport is so special, why we love this sport so much, and why I think it's going to be okay. Now that I think is very, very, that's in all caps, but I do think it's going to be okay, but tons to be seen, and the college football playoff is just one of the changes that is coming next year. So, but when we come back from break, we're going to break down all the different changes. Now, I probably won't get to them all because, man, there are tons, but I will try to make it easy on you all, give you a one-stop shop for a ton of different changes happening across the country. But we are going to take a short break before that, so stick with us and we will be right back.